he jumped really, like not CG, but from one plane to another plane.
I'm Matt Mack, and this is Bloody Mavericks, Part 3. It's a beautiful that you brought up Apple's story, and any kind of a founder, entrepreneurial story, or any type of trendsetter, I would say you are a perfect example of a Maverick story in that sense, because you stick to what you thought is your way and your vision for it. Even though the hardships, the letdowns, the closed doors, you kept on with the idea, and also kept on talking about it to people and pitching it, and and it paid off.
Yeah. And then the next steps were a little bit more natural, if you will. There are plenty of second unit directors that are stunt coordinators. That's not reinventing the wheel. That is a thing. There are some famous second unit directors, Simon Crane being one of them. Like he was a stunt performer, and then he became a stunt coordinator. One of the big gags he did, was it Point Break, that he jumped really, like not CG, but from one plane to another plane. He had a parachute, but he jumped from one plane to another plane in the movie, and got paid quite handsomely for it, I heard. But he then, moving through stunt coordinating and eventually second unit directing, and has if you don't know his name, if your audience is watching this and they're like, I don't know who that is, but yeah, I guarantee you've seen his work, because we're talking like Mission Impossible type things, and certainly Fast and Furious, and a lot of these big action, crazy action movies. He's the guy, right? And there are some other ones now too that are out there, like Wade Eastwood, whom I did actually work for before. He's from the UK. He was working here for a little while, and then he went back. He's the stunt coordinator for Tom Cruise on the Mission Impossible movies, and now he's second unit directing, and he's doing an amazing job. I'm really impressed with what he's the level that he's brought himself to. It's totally stunning, So I wouldn't be reinventing the wheel at all, and that is basically what happened. I mean, I was still making previs as the stunt coordinator, and sometimes also the fight coordinator at the same time, but I would want to either direct or film the action sequences that we were submitting as our basically proof of concept. And eventually, especially on bigger projects, there isn't enough time to shoot all the principal photography and shoot the action at the same, in sequence. So we break off a unit, second unit or splinter unit, and someone needs to go direct that. And who better to do that than the person who designed it? So that was a natural extension. On the other hand, that wasn't hard to break through. What was hard was getting into the unions, because there's some gatekeeping that happens there. But I eventually did get into the DGC, and then the step to directing, again, another natural extension of that. Eventually, I was offered my own episode on What We Do in the Shadows, through some specific circumstances that required an immediate director to come up. They're like, well, who better to do it than, if we need it all of a sudden, there's not enough time to prep, than the person who has been working on the show the whole time, and has been already directing action on the show, and has in fact been directing some of the actors, and knows everybody. So that was my opportunity to show that I could also direct physical storytelling, right? And that was terrifying because I was out of my element, right? By this point, I would have already been directing action for about a decade. Again, first unofficially, but then officially. But I had been doing it for that long, so it was natural to me. But to I always put it like this, and this is the difference. This is the major difference. This is the part that scared me. So if you're a second unit director and you're my stunt performer, and I say, hey, Matt, fall there, and you would say, yes, sir, how hard? Because that's what you say. Yeah. When you're a stunt performer, because I'm not only the second unit director, I'm probably the stunt coordinator. Certainly if I'm the stunt coordinator and I tell you to fall down, you say, yes, sir, how hard? But now if I'm the director and I say to the actor, I want you to, well, not necessarily fall down, but I want you to go over there, and then you say, well, what's my motivation? I've never had to deal with that, right? And I knew that. So I'm like, going into it, I was like, man, what the fuck? Because I know it will happen, because I've seen it happen. Like, as a stunt coordinator, you're there and you're watching everything happen, and you design action, and sometimes you see when things kind of grind to a halt if there is not a clear path. If people don't understand why they're doing something, it's understandable that they're going to stop everything and ask if it hasn't been discussed. That's why you want to try to discuss these things ahead of time if you can. You want to discover these things. But in television, there's not a lot of time. There's usually you don't rehearse scenes beforehand. You go in there and you do a quick rehearsal before you bring in the crew, and then you show it to the crew, and then off you go. So by that point, like, if a question hasn't been asked, it's going to be asked there, and you have to have the answer. Your job then, as a television director or film director, I suppose I haven't directed a film yet, but is to know the script inside and out, backward and forward, to know all the character arcs, to know why everybody does what they do, to know what everybody does, so that you know what you're doing, and so that you can tell them what they're doing and why they're doing it. Not because they weren't paying attention, but you're gonna shoot episodes often out of sequence, and you may know some things that they don't sometimes, and so you need to be able to know the answers to the questions before they're asked. And I didn't mind that, because that's just preparation. As they say, as the smart people say, fix it in prep. What do they say? The four most expensive words: fix it in post. You could ever utter, right? Is when you're not preparing and things come up, you're like, I don't know, just fix it in post. It's like, yeah, that could be a very expensive solution. Yeah. Fix it in prep. So be prepared, know all your materials, know everything, have the answers before they are asked as best you can.
Because at the end of the day, that's actor's role to feel and transmit the emotion of the sequence that he's going to go through.
They need to believe in what they are doing, whether they are method and they are the character, even if they're not. If they're not method, they still need to trust that this is what their character would do, or that this makes sense because they're the person doing it. And so you have to earn that trust, and you keep earning it by working with them and by helping them express themselves safely, right? It's interesting, because when you think about it, and I had never said this before out loud, but I suppose you are, as a stunt coordinator, you're creating action, but you're creating the action to be safe as much as you can, to create the environment for it to happen and to design it. And I think that as the director, you need to create a safety for the actors to do what they need to do as well. It's a different kind of safety, of course.
That's right.
But yeah, that's another way to look at it. That is like from the beginning to here where I am now, where I have been fortunate enough to direct a few of my own episodes, and looking to do more. We have another season coming. Nothing mentioned yet, but I have my fingers crossed, and other ventures as well as that I'm in discussions for. So
amazing. Yeah, it's fascinating to see that through your journey went on reinventing yourself over and over and adjusting and pivoting and going at it from different perspectives and finding your own way to get where you want to get. If one door closes, finding the other one that can open for you. It is truly amazing. I just want to know if there is anything that you would say that, in your words, besides because that's how I see a maverick, someone who goes and does things regardless of the problems and challenges that he or she or they are facing. Is there anything to a maverick for you that embrace, that you can, who is the maverick for you?
Oh, who is the maverick? I'm not one for the only iconic figure I had for me goes back to my childhood, and interestingly enough, Bruce Lee was a maverick. He was an actor. He was a child actor. I didn't even know this until a couple of years ago. He was a child actor, but he was an actor. He was a martial artist, and he re-envisioned how martial arts can be done by designing his own system. I think he knew what he was up against trying to break into the film industry in America. He knew and he understood. In interviews, he said, he goes, yeah, no, I get why people don't want to take a chance on me. If I were in Hong Kong making Asian films and a white guy wanted to come over here and said, I wanted to be a star in one of your films, I would have pause as well, because I don't know if that's going to work. Right? So he was quite rational. But I guess he would be the first maverick for me, without even knowing what that word was and without understanding that was what he was up against, and that he was creating his own game, trying to pitch to Warner Brothers this idea of a series in the US, in the 1970s, where there was an Asian lead. I mean, he didn't get it, but he was trying to, and he certainly met with, he maybe didn't get everything he wanted because his life was so short, sadly. But you have to think about the fact that it's been 50 years since he passed, and we're still talking about him.
Oh, yes.
They did Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, as much as that depiction of him wasn't necessarily the most favorable, the point is that we're still referencing him. Yep. Right? And that is more success than I think that he could have ever imagined, in a way. Even though he didn't get the break that he wanted, the imprint that he made on me, you think about that, and countless other people, right? That's an incredible, indelible mark on our society. So he would be the original maverick, I suppose. Beyond that, as a neurodivergent person, I don't tend to follow people. I don't tend to seek external validation. I just have an internal drive to keep going in many ways, whether it was like fighting competitively or bodybuilding or, things we never even talked about. And now my desire to tell stories, and find a way to tell those stories, that is really like an internal drive. So on the inside of every suit that I own, that I have made, there are custom suits. I have this expression in Latin, aut viam inveniam aut faciam. Don't know how good my Latin pronunciation is, but it means I will find a way or make one.
That's something that we spoke about on the phone, when I noticed it on your signature in your email, and that made me stop. And if someone has Latin in their email, That's definitely something I'm gonna pay attention to straight away.
Yeah, that made me laugh when you told me that on the phone. You're like, if someone has Latin, I'm going to pay attention. It's like, that's funny, but so true. You know, I suppose I would react the same way. Very rarely I will see people have sign-offs. But as I said, it is so much of a way of life. It's in my sign-off, in my emails, and it's in my suits. You know, that's how much I hold that at the core, you know, whatever it is I'm trying to do.
It is a way of a maverick to kind of make a way, because usually we don't fit the mold. We usually are the ones who stand out, that are outcast on the way, because we think differently. We try to find solution or approach problems in a different way that for people who've been dealing with them for years might be waste of time, might be ridiculous, but we in some way we find that this might be more effective, that might be more beneficial, there might be a better, just better way of doing things. And if you don't have the way, make it.
Yeah, if you don't have the way, make it. And that can be, is not a feature of this. I would say that both neurotypical people will do this, of a certain personality. And I would say that neurodivergent people have to do this because they live in a neurotypical world. You will have to find a way to navigate it in a world that isn't necessarily structured in a way that is conducive for you to, well, exist at the very least, exist, function, or succeed.
Yeah.
And that will probably make you a maverick no matter what, right?
True.
In at least the smallest possible way. You have to. And it's been interesting because I didn't really realize that I spent a lifetime masking. I do it much less now. I, of course, self-identify as what I am in terms of, my neural function. But I also don't try to cover it like I used to.
How did you come up to it? What was your journey on self-discovery or acceptance at that point? Like, what happened for you to kind of embrace it?
That's an interesting question. Here's the thing. It's only been recent, in fact. Maybe I'm a little bit too much like a vegetarian or a CrossFitter. How do you know if someone's a CrossFitter or a vegetarian? Because they'll tell you. Or a recently self-discovered neurodivergent person. No, I always knew that I was different. And I'm not talking racially, of course, which I was reminded of every day again as soon as I went to public school. But I always knew that something was different in terms of how things worked for me or how I put things together. But I would say I always thought there was something wrong with me. That's to be honest, is how I felt about myself growing up. So I had a lot of challenges. Both from racial trauma, but also from the trauma of growing up neurodivergent and undiagnosed. Now, if you go back enough years, and again, I was in a smaller city, and a lot of this science is only being, it's still in development now in terms of understanding it, obviously, right? How could I have had a diagnosis? It's unlikely that I would have anyway. So, it is what it is. But I certainly did not receive any, special attention or education, and I was dyslexic, as you had self-identified. That was maddening. I never got what that was about, because I remembered I was not good at some things in school. I was having a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety problems anyways, but there were some subjects that I would just excel at, and I would get like these marks, like high 90s, and to be honest, it's like I wouldn't even be studying for them or doing anything. And one of those things was English. Writing essays, book reports and things like that. I was excelled at those things. I was very good at it. And the maddening thing for me, I also have dyscalculia. So of course I was terrible at math. Like lower math was easy. It's fairly straightforward. But the minute you got into calculus and sort of slightly more complex things, this tendency to flip your numerals the same way you do as a dyslexic, right? I'm sure you've seen, those when they write or type out or print out a paragraph, and all the word letters are all jumbled except for the first letter and the last letter, and you can read it almost at speed. Yeah. Right? Because they say that your brain can figure it out, at least with the first letter and the last letter.
That's true. You
can flip things. And as a dyslexic, which I don't have to explain to you, you would tend to flip those things all the time. You can't help it. You just do it, right? Definitely. Well, for math, if you're doing a series of equations, the minute you flip two numbers, you will never get the right answer, will you? Right? And so once the math started getting a little bit higher, my marks just like nosedived. That was not good for me. Being the Asian kid, talk about underperforming to a stereotype. Okay, I'm sort of joking, but I'm not joking. That's, that is the stereotype, isn't it? I was the Asian kid that was bad at math, terrible at math actually, but very, very good at English. I don't know, because words. I'm a word nerd. I love language. I have learned a few, not fluent in everything, but I love learning new languages and love learning new words for that matter still. So I would get very high marks, like 98, 99, 96. And the reason why I wouldn't get a perfect mark is because you would see that red line drawn through words in your essay, and then your spelling corrected, and I had the right spelling. I would just have letters turned around, and I would get my report back, and I would look at it. I'd just be furious. I'm like, what the fuck? Why does this happen? I don't understand. And it's invisible to me until somebody pointed it out to me, as someone who is dyslexic. So, growing up with that, and then I'm also, I have recently received my diagnoses with adult ADHD and adult ASD. It's very interesting when you have both those things, by the way, because there's this sort of Venn diagram when they cross over, and it creates a very specific type of personality, which is the personality that I am, with many other influences. Just perfectionism and fairness being extremely important. There's a bunch of things, but problems with misplacing things, like all these. A certain absent-mindedness, time blindness. It's very important for me to be punctual as a person who believes in discipline, but I also suck at it sometimes because I have time blindness. I don't know how long it takes to do something, or my ADHD kicks in and I think that I can do 3 more things before it's time to leave, and I really don't have time to do it, but I just don't know. Even as an adult now, I still don't seem to know. I'm a poor judge of it, and that is a result of my ADHD, but also my ASD kind of working together to sabotage me. So you asked, how do I, come to accept that, or it's like very slowly, because I was undiagnosed, didn't understand what was preventing me from doing well in school. I'm a university dropout, I have to say. I left high school. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was very angry also at the time because of how I grew up. I went into university thinking, oh, well, maybe I will do something in commerce, maybe. Then, no, actually it's sports medicine. No, it's actually art. I don't know. Kind of fumbled around, and then I just dropped out because I had no direction. But I also had a lot of trouble with certain courses that I couldn't do, and I still hadn't been diagnosed yet. I would also have complex PTSD. You cannot talk about growing up neurodivergent without talking about trauma. I already mentioned the other trauma through racism, but also as a neurodivergent person, you cannot grow up neurodivergent without trauma. You can also pretty much guarantee that you cannot grow up queer without talking about trauma, right? Because all these things means you don't belong, or there's something wrong with you. It's only been in the recent couple of years that I've been kind of, through kind of the advice of a friend who is also neurodivergent, maybe you should look into these things. Maybe you should explore these things. Do you know that you're autistic? And I'm like, I don't know what you mean. And like, because you are. I'm like, oh. I didn't believe it, but I started reading about it, and the more I looked into it, the more I would have all these aha moments. And then I was pretty much self-diagnosed a couple of years ago, which is not official, but you know what you know. And then recently, like I said, I had my official diagnoses through a registered psychologist, and it's been great because acceptance, it's like anything. It's like, it's like having an addiction problem. You can't deal with it until you accept it. You're not going to adopt the tools that might be available to you to function better as a neurodivergent person unless you first recognize that you are and also accept it. And there's a great freedom to that, though, when it finally did happen, because you blame yourself for losing things. I lose things a lot. I get mad at myself for doing it, but now I just kind of tell myself when I do it, well, that's the cost of doing business with a neurodivergent brain. It's like I can think of really cool things. I can learn a lot of things. I have a lot of disparate skills. And I love acquiring new ones, but it also means I might lose my keys every goddamn day when I'm trying to leave the house and get to my car. And it's going to also make me even later than I already am because I tried to do 3 things that I didn't have time for before I had to leave the house. So you're getting a snapshot into my life. That's a little bit personal, but there it is, right? Yes. It has taken some time to recognize that as an undiagnosed person growing up, to get to the point of self-diagnosing and believing it, and then getting official diagnoses. So you finally settle to the idea of what you are. And I think it's an awesome thing. I'm very happy to be in this spot in my life right now. You may find it interesting to explore that yourself. Your list making and your dyslexia could be road signs to something.
Yeah, I feel for sure there are a lot of things in the regular world that would be wrong with me. And when you are talking about your journey on discovering it and getting that hint from your friend, I can relate. I went through similar process, not exactly on neurodivergent, but acceptance of my background, and yeah, it is super rewarding when you get there, right? It's so healing. as well.
It's healing. It helps you to deal with yourself. And, I've been continuing to research and learn things, and then I've come across literature and other things that talk about how to help the people in your life deal with your neurodivergent ass. Because I didn't even think about that. Like, I just always think about my struggle. It's like, why am I like this? Why is it so hard? Why is it so freaking hard all the time? And then you find out why, and you take a deep breath, and you're like, okay, now I know why. And then maybe here are some things, because again, there's more literature and more studies and more things being learned about that. That might help you, like understanding that if you do too much task switching, that you will start losing executive function, and then therefore you will not be efficient at your task. So you need to know that to design your day, let's say, if you have any control over it whatsoever, to not allow that to happen to you, or to recognize it when it's happening and not kick yourself. You're like, why can't I do more? Why can't I do better? It's like, well, you're doing too much or too many things. It's not that you can't do it, but if you're jumping back and forth, it's not good. It's not good for anybody, actually. Ultimately, that's one of the things that we know, that we live
doesn't work.
Exactly. We live in a society where everybody is being asked to multitask now. Usually in professional settings, and we know that it's not good for our brains. We simply did not evolve to be able to do that. But for the neurodivergent brain, it can just, it can just make you useless. But yes. People with ADHD can be a little bit, bull in the china shop when they're on their upcycle of how they're functioning, because there is a kind of almost a manic depressive kind of characteristic. It's not manic depression, but it is like that people who have ADHD go through. And I always have. And it's related to, interestingly enough, for those who want to know, people with ADHD typically have a lower baseline of dopamine. So you will want to do things that spike your dopamine, which can be, things like thrill-seeking behaviors. It's like, hey, here we go. We're back. I'm a stunt performer, right? Fighting and that type of thing, right? Driving fast, you need that to spike you. But when you get that spike, it's like anything else. It's like doing illicit drugs, right? You got to hit a dopamine, and then it drops. And with people with ADHD, it not only drops, it doesn't drop to the baseline, which is already lower than normal. It drops below the baseline. And when you get down there, it is very much like a depression. And so I used to think I was manic depressive, actually undiagnosed, which I don't think that's quite correct. Really, I think it has much more to do with neurodivergence. But I would always find myself below the line and feeling terrible, even though nothing bad had happened, right? And so this would explain a lot of behaviors in my life. So it's very interesting. But specifically, the people who love you, who live with you, or have to work with you, they have to deal with that too. It's not all just about you. And I, as a person trying to mask, would try to present myself on an even keel as much as I could. But I mean, there's only so much you can do.
That's true.
And especially if it's someone you live with or whatever, you definitely can't do it continuously. That's too much of a load to carry. So you're going to let that go, but then they have to deal with it. Right. So learning about the condition, such as it is, learning your own coping mechanisms, but also understanding how it is for other people, and then maybe having tools and mechanisms for them that they can apply, or explaining to them what's happening to you so they know you're not mad at them, or you're not whatever, or you're not, or when you're on an upcycle, it's not that you don't care what they have to say, it's that your brain is going so fast that you have to get out what you have to say right now. You just have to. It's an imperative. And it's not a disrespect to that person that you're talking over them. It's one of the characteristics of ADHD. So that was a very long-winded explanation of, you know, coming around to how acceptance of, you know, yourself and how to live with it. But it comes through understanding it, and then only through understanding it can you accept it.
It really sounds that you feel free after going through the process and getting there.
I do. I'm very. I count myself very fortunate. I mean, life is full of struggle. It is for all of us. We don't know what's coming around the corner. Currently, I'm chronically unemployed due to, you know, the looming writer's strike, which was coming, and there was no production starting, and then now it's here, and there's no production starting. Well, very few. And so, you know, I'm just like, you know, so that's a struggle. But I still count myself very lucky because I get to have the ability of self-discovery, right? I can afford to access the right professional care. I can afford to access, I mean, information. A lot of it is free now with the age of the internet and so on, but I do buy books and I do get audiobooks, and I'm constantly in self-study mode. Self-directed study, both for now directing, which is the thing that I'm currently obsessed with, but also for things like neurodivergence and its various facets and how it works and so on and how it applies to me. Also freeing is being professionally out, which has only been for about 5 years. You know, it's been freeing to do that, something that you hide for various reasons, various practical reasons, but now you don't, and then the freedom that gives you in terms of self-expression, and also in terms of the ability to help others, because you can't help anybody if you're hiding.
Yep.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah. It's definitely a lot to handle, a big luggage or baggage to carry. But once you let it go, it's definitely giving you a new perspective and new possibilities to. Yeah.
A lot of these things they will inform how you move through the world. They will inform how you do your work. And in my case, my work is creative. I'm very lucky to be a creative. So they will inform how I create and what I create. I'm very curious and interested to know how the most recent revelations that I have, you know, of myself, sounds very egocentric, doesn't it? But you know, I'm very interested to see how these things will inform how I create if something changes. I know it will. There's not if. You know, and paying attention to it was actually through COVID, through the pandemic, and this is universal. I hear this all the time. Like I listen to filmmaking podcasts. I listen to so many different kinds of podcasts, and you always have this. I mean, the pandemic was and is. It's still kind of ongoing, actually, in a way. Highly destructive, and I will not minimize the impacts of lives lost and economies damaged.
Social impact, on
right?
people,
Social
right?
impact, right? But also a lot of cultural good came out of it. You think of like the Black Lives Matters movement. I mean, that happened because of certain events that were captured on video. You know, these events happen all the time. True. In the US. It's not new. Yeah. Right? But everybody was captive. They were home. They were stuck on this never-ending news cycle and social media cycle that just kept talking about this thing. And that caused social movement, right? That's a positive thing. For me, I had a lot of time to think about, interestingly, I was thinking about sexual orientation, because again, I'd already been out for a period of time by then. But why I still didn't fit in to certain groups within that community. Because I'm like, okay, I'm queer. I always knew I was since I was a child, in a way, although I didn't do anything about it because I was too busy struggling with other things. And then getting more involved with the community and being professionally out just as, that, just as queer. I'm like, but why doesn't it fit still? And part of it is the neurodivergence, because it's like you don't fit easily into society, whether it's straight society or queer society, because you're neurodivergent. But then when you realize that you're genderqueer, which is something that just kind of happened because I had the luxury of time. I wasn't working. I was just sitting there and I was contemplating why it doesn't work. And I'm like, well, it doesn't work if you are perceived as male moving through a queer community, if that's not how you identify. And as soon as I put that template on, it was like a shocking moment, because I'm like, oh shit, that's what the problem is. So incidentally, and I haven't mentioned it, but I would call myself gender fluid. And I don't tend to use Western terms for that, only because I don't like how those terms are attacked as neoliberalist or neoliberal concepts. Some of these concepts have been around for, even in Western society, for as much as like 100 years actually, or more. But what I prefer to do is draw on the Aboriginal ancestral origins of non-binary genders, because of course Polynesian people have that. They've had that for millennium before contact with Western cultures. So that's the way I identify, if I have to spell it out, which I often just don't. I just know that I'm here in the middle somewhere, and it's the right place for me to be. And so this is how I sort of move through the world in terms of my self-expression and how I present myself, for instance. That has been very freeing. So, it's interesting because you talk about maverick. It's like, what is a maverick and what do they do? It's usually finding, their own path, and there's sort of many paths sort of coming from all these differences that are converging into the being that is me, I suppose, right? So again, how does that inform how I will move through the world, and how does it inform how I will create? We're finding out.
Do you find, since you identified that it helped you, like through the conversations, through regular conversations, is because sometimes it might look for people who do not understand or don't identify with anything really, or don't get the difference. Does finding out for yourself and identifying help you go through the conversations on a regular daily life, or is it mainly on the deeper level conversations with people who you trust, or is it part of your, I don't know how to name it, presentation when you meet somebody new, and this is how you would inform them about who you are, or present yourself, kind of.
Let's see if I understand that as a question.
Yeah, it was a long preamble.
Right. Let's go back to identity things. Racial identity is something you cannot hide. You are the color of what you are. If you have kinky hair, if you have straight hair, if you're white, if you're dark.
That's right.
So I present that way no matter what, and that was difficult for me growing up in the community that I grew up in, because that was not well received. But it is different in here and in other parts of the world, and this particular time. That's going to, I don't control that, but I do control neurodivergence, and whether I decide to mask or not, how much of it I decide to let out, and I let out a lot more of it now than I used to. And I do control how I express orientation, and I also do control how I communicate gender identity. And I enjoy, I guess, communicating a fair amount of that through, and this is very autistic of me, but through the cues that I have available to me, right? So the way in which I dress, and the way in which I, carry myself, and maybe the way in which I speak, and whatever, these are going to touch on all of those things. I don't know if someone's going to pick up on all of it. I mean, depending who it is, and I go, well, this dude is weird. I mean, maybe that's all I get out of all that, right? It's like, or maybe, this person's brain seems to work a little bit differently. Or maybe this person is definitely somewhere in the middle here with their gender expression, if they're, observant enough. And I think that, I can start conversations that way. I might start bad conversations because some people just really may be upset by it. And I understand that. I try to hold a little bit of space for it, as long as it's not malicious. I have very little space for it if it is, mind you. But I'm always open to discussion, and I'm always open to spreading what knowledge I have that I've managed to gain through gathering and also through insight, because I think that's sort of my purpose in the world, if you will. So I don't know, does that answer your sort of question?
It does it sounds like you are painting a picture to help people understand you, and people, neurodivergent people and queer people, better.
Yes, exactly.
As simple as that.
As simple as that, really. And all of us, really, we are, we are unique snowflakes. And I think it's interesting. I'm interested in how other people are different than me, but I have curiosity about it, and that's what I want other people to feel, hopefully, when they see how I present in all the ways that I present. Is like, is this curious for you? Good, because I am also curious about you, maybe we are very dissimilar, maybe we are more similar than you think, maybe some of my dissimilarities you can relate to.
That's right.
Right? Just like you and I talking about, you're like, well, I identify, my neurodivergence, and you're like, well, I'm dyslexic, and I don't know, I think I might be. Yeah, there's the conversation, right? And I openly talk about orientation things and gender things now. I didn't before, And it is interesting the number of conversations I have had, mostly private, sometimes in a group, small group, where people will be a little bit more open about talking about those things. And I can tell if they don't expressly say, I don't talk about this with people, I don't normally talk about it, but they'll talk about it with me. Or they'll talk about it with me in a small group if I am modeling curiosity. I like that, and I like doing that.
I think with a lot of different things that we spoke about today, like from a racial perspective to colonialism, through sexual preference to economical inclinations, whatever it might be, there's a really thin line to rubbing people wrong way, and as Mavericks we tend to do that so often.
Sure.
Because we are more straightforward, more open, and we are willing to go where it might burn a little, it might hurt a little, but we will get more out of it and be able to express ourselves better in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you remember my early comment about going to hell and have to making small talk. So I'm either the most socially awkward person, or maybe I make some social situations sort of interesting. I don't know, because I will raise a topic that you probably shouldn't talk about. You know, what you're not supposed to talk about, what is it, sex, religion, and politics, you know, at a social gathering, and I will only ever talk about those things because I'm not talking about sports. It's not interesting to me.
Yep.
Right.
Makes
so
sense.
I am that person that, you know, I kind of like kick the hornet's nest in some ways, you know, not because I'm trying to cause trouble, but I like to exchange ideas. I want to know what you think, you know, and I want to talk about something that has an impact, or, you know, that maybe I'm going to go home and think about it now because you said that to me, or maybe you'll go home and think about that now because I said something. I think that's more interesting, you know. You know, at the very least, if, you know, special interests that people have, I can always learn from that too, that I have curiosity about, and I have too many special interests of my own that I can certainly happily share, because that's the way to make an autistic person talk. Just ask about their special interest and they won't shut up. Right? They might be the quiet person in the room, but just ask them about butterfly collecting and they'll tell you about butterfly collecting for 2 hours. You know, that's me. I you know, admittedly, right?
On the butterfly front as well?
No. That was just an example. For me, it might be filmmaking, it might be martial arts, it might be something, right? It might be underwater photography, if you ask me.
That's the passion
that's my special interest, plural, that I have, and so I'm happy to certainly share that stuff, but I'm also, you know, very curious if somebody else has a special interest, you know.
It is also super interesting for me as we are walking through this conversation and me trying to understand where you are coming from, what you are dealing with, what you have been struggling with, and what are you facing right now. And it amazes me that the way you talk about the important topics for you, and those areas that you're not pushing it. There's a lot of times for me, being a straight man, it is sometimes it might be ego. My wife probably would say it's my ego, being feeling endangered or too vulnerable at times, and where I feel that some of agendas are pushed into my face in a way that I'm not able to swallow. Whereas with having the conversation with you, it is based on mutual relation, mutual respect, and understanding each other, and putting the point forward, and trying to engage in meaningful conversation, instead of, oh, this is what you have to be thinking, this is what it is, this is the way to do it right now. And it is phenomenal, because that makes us, either as Mavericks, either as a species, human being, unique in our own ways, and whether it's a sexual preference or a color of our skin, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, we are human beings, and that's the only qualifying feature between, I would say, different species that we should be thinking of. Not to talk too much about how are we different, because there are so many topics to talk about. How are we similar, and what are those things, the similarities, but also the unique things about us.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic in itself. We're going to run out of time. Don't get me started, but the topic of like identity politics right now, because you triggered this thought in me, because there's a lot of like Gen Z people who are kind of like, what's up with, you people, you old people, you older people, why do you care so much about like all this like orientation politics, all these micro labels? There's so many micro labels, and the answer to that I have is that we don't yet live in a post-racial society. We don't yet live in a post-homophobic society. We don't live in a post-misogynistic society. You have to recognize the people who are pushed to the edges, and for the people who have been pushed to the edges, they need to claim space for themselves, and it can become maybe somewhat annoying to other people. It's kind of like, why do you have to do this? I had a conversation with a trans woman recently, just casual conversation. I was just talking about, kind of where I sit on the spectrum, because I actually do believe that gender is a spectrum thing. And they kind of like fired up almost the way like some cis people do, and they're just kind of whoa. I said, oh my god, I can't take all these labels. Like, why does it have to be all these, and I said, because you should know very well, you have claimed this, your gender identity, which is binary, because you were born male and you identify as female, and now you have transitioned, and you're like, well, what's with these people in the middle? And it's like, because we're here too, because of exactly what you said, because of the people who said to you, cis people who don't accept them, her, right? They're like, that's not a thing. You can't be born this way and then just say you're that way. You just can't do that. You just made that shit up. You can't do that. Stop it. And yet you did it because it is your truth, because it is real and it is valid. And now you're saying to me, why are you doing this? Why are you occupying this space in the center? I just can't stand all of this, like subdividing these identities, right? And I'm like, because I have to.
Mm.
I can't afford not to,
Mm.
because I don't belong here and I don't belong where you are.
And
right? And also not to lose the point, this identity, which is called Mahu, by the way, in the Hawaiian language for the third gender that they have. This has been around since pre-colonial times, millennia before colonial times. And it was erased, nearly erased, by colonizers. And we are reclaiming that. So you don't get to say that to me. You just can't. Well, you can, but, you know, I'm not going to accept it. Because I have a right. And that's the whole point. The point is that until we live in a post-racial, post-homophobic, post-transphobic society, we are going to have to let people take their space and recognize them. Maybe we could celebrate it. That's what I would like to see happen, if you had to ask me. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could celebrate the rich diversity that makes up the tapestry of what being a human being is? It's pretty friggin' amazing.
Yes.
The stuff that we make.
That's right.
As musicians, as, you know, artists, as neurodivergent people, as neurotypical people, as trans people, as queer people, as everything. We're all part of what makes up the society. That's what makes it amazing. That's what makes it wonderful. I would love to see the point when we get past the divisiveness of defining these things. Defining is dividing, in a way.
Yeah.
At first. But once we have identified and we go, these parts of the human existence are all valid, if we could just get there, and they are valid and should be celebrated, right? Then that is the place where we need to get. Wouldn't that be wonderful if we could do that? So that's why I present my arguments in the way that I do, because you talked about like some things feel a bit confusing or confrontational, or it's hard for you to digest or swallow. And you might notice the way that I try to present these concepts, right? So I try to do it in a way. I don't know that I succeed all the time. In fact, it's impossible to, but I try to do it in a way that people can digest it, that they can walk away. I'm not going to tell them that they're wrong. I'm not going to beat them over the head with it. I'm just going to say, may I suggest this to you? And I would love it if you would think about it and consider it.
There's a lot of areas that divide us.
Yes.
And labels are one of them. As you said, they might be, in an ideal world, we would accept it all of the whole spectrum, and whether it's gonna be straight, binary, or trans, we would accept them all, or anything in between that might come to fruition at any point. But again, we've been programmed for so long as a society, and as both culturally, both politically, those have been weaponized for so many years, and they are just another tool for making us fight within our communities instead of joining forces together and kind of trying to embrace what we have and what's beautiful about it.
Well, and doesn't that lead us back to what we started with? It's a great place to end it, which is, I have a radical hope of empathy being in our future, greater empathy and inclusion being in our future, because that is the only direction that evolution can take us.
That's true.
It can never take us the other way, because that is not how we got here. So there you go.
I wanna close it with 3 questions.
Uh-oh. All right. Are these pre-written questions? I think they are. Okay.
What's your failure story?
I mean, that's an interesting thing. I was talking about failure more recently with somebody professionally. And, you know, I was saying that it's taken me so long to get here because of all the obstacles, because of the disenfranchisement that I experienced growing up, that I just didn't want to succeed. I didn't want to be a part of society. Indeed, I didn't fit into society very well, because unbeknownst to me, my brain didn't work that way either. And so I didn't try. And now that in the past, you know, especially decade, I've been trying very hard, and I've been making a lot of progress, I guess. You know, a lot has changed for me, because we kind of went through my career path over this time frame that we've been talking. And I have made errors, professional errors. None of them really stood out a lot, but procedural things that I've done wrong, and I would kick myself, I would flog myself for it, because I would tell myself, well, it was so hard to get here. You can't afford to make mistakes. It's natural, it's human, but you can't afford it. But it has been said, there's an expression that says, if failure is not an option, then neither is success.
True.
So I know I will make more mistakes, like the ones I've made, and maybe worse, as I continue to try to succeed. But I know that I need to make those mistakes in order to grow and learn. So I mean, that's kind of what I have to say about failure.
Amazing. It is yin and yang, if you think about it. Success goes hand in hand with the failure, and the only way we can succeed is through failure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What question would you like to be asked more often?
Oh. What are your pronouns? Oh, that's going to piss some people off. I know that really bothers some people. I know that that's very upsetting for people, but I don't want them to do it for me, by the way. I'm quite all right. I have grown up as a he/him my whole life, and I'm good at it. I can do he/him. I do feel that they/them is much more appropriate, and I'm rather flattered when I get she/her. And I want to be asked this question, not so much for me, although I know I will appreciate it. I really will. But to know that other people are being open and respectful to other people, right? So I've had people who have, I don't want to turn this into too long an answer because it's a closing question, I get it. But I've heard people get frustrated at this. They fluster at it. They're like, oh, yeah, this is too much to, how am I supposed to remember like people's like chosen like, you know, pronouns? It's like frig. It's like I can't. I'm like, really? Are you serious? Because when I first meet somebody, I'm like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. I'm Teek. What's your name? Oh, you're Matt. Oh, okay, Matt, right? And that's it. What's your name? I can't say to you, well, Matt, you really look like a Steve that I met before. So if you don't mind, it's kind of a stress on me to call you Matt because, fuck, how am I going to remember that anyways? Because you look just like this guy I knew that's named Steve. So it's okay if I just call you Steve, right? It's not okay because that's a lack of respect. That's like a basic respect to use somebody's name, which is their identity. That was what was given to them when they were growing up, or maybe they chose it later in life because of a name that suited them better. That's how they want to be addressed. Is it so much? So this is what I say to people who push against it, and this is the reason why I answer the question that way.
Awesome. And the last one.
Okay.
What have been the greatest day of your life?
That's a hard one because I keep having them. No, literally, I do. I mean, life is such an adventure. It's may have been the greatest day of my life to leave the place where I used to live to come to this city, because that is when my life like felt like it really started, right? Might have been, you know, the greatest day of my life may have been to play with a Cape fur seal in South Africa inside of a kelp line, and these little baby fur seals are playing with me. They're like little puppies, and they're running around, they're grabbing my fins and they're biting them and they're pulling on my camera. And 10 meters that way on the other side of the kelp are white sharks patrolling that eat these seals, and the only reason why those white sharks don't come in is because they don't like the kelp. They don't like being touched by the kelp. You probably didn't know that.
No.
And this ability to play with a wild animal, I mean, I wasn't encroaching on them. They came to me, and they're the ones, they're literally harassing me by attacking me in a playful way, like they do with each other. And I'm like, this is the greatest, most wonderful experience I've ever had. But I have had more experiences like that since then. Right? That was 7 years ago. But I have had more experiences since then. And then I remember walking onto the set of my set as a director and starting the day. And that was just the greatest day. But I will keep having them. So
that's the best answer for sure.
Yeah.
Tig, thank you so much for being here. It was an honor.
It was a pleasure.
And it's a wrap. We dare you. If you are bold enough, hit subscribe, repost the rebellion, and don't miss out on next week's episode. It's going to be bloody brilliant. See you on the next one.